Imagine a clay tablet smaller than the palm of your hand. Not gold, not decorated with jewels, just fired clay, cracks, cuneiform signs, and a few lines that look almost like a map. But because of those lines, one archival box was allegedly removed from a catalog, and the man who first described it never published another paper on Mesopotamia. The tablet showed a shoreline. The problem is that this shoreline no longer exists on the surface of the earth. Where the scribe left the shape of land, there is now dark water and kilometers of ocean. That is why this story does not begin with an answer. It begins with an object. Objects in archives rarely scream. They simply wait in the dark until someone notices that one line in the clay does not match what the textbooks say. If this map is genuine, it does not simply add another mystery to the Sumerians. It changes the question itself. We are used to thinking of the first cities as products of river valleys, the Tigris, the Euphrates, canals, fields, temples, grain. But what if some of that knowledge did not come from the desert interior? What if it came from a coast that later drowned? And if the tablet is a fake, the problem does not become easier. Then someone in the early 20th century invented a contour that, decades later, began to resemble maps of the sea floor. In a strong mystery, the frightening part is not the miracle. It is the precision of the details. A fake usually tries too hard to be sensational. This fragment does the opposite. It looks boring, almost technical, and that makes it more dangerous to the accepted version of the past. The story begins with a dry archival line. In a 1912 catalog prepared for a private collection of Near Eastern antiquities, there is a small entry. Tablet with geographic signs, origin disputed. Beside it is the number of a wooden box and a pencil note. Do not display. A few years later, the card disappears. What remains is a bad photograph, a gray blurred image showing cuneiform signs and a strange diagram as if a coastline had been drawn by someone who had seen it from above. The most disturbing thing about old catalogs is that they rarely explain why something was hidden. There is no dramatic stamp saying forbidden. There is only absence, a missing card, a broken sequence, a box number that no longer leads anywhere. And sometimes absence speaks louder than a seal. At first glance, the fragment looks almost harmless. Several lines, 3 elongated shapes that resemble islands, a deep inlet, and a sign that appears twice, a clean crescent with exactly 3 short vertical marks beneath it. Not decoration, not random scratches, a separate symbol placed where the map seems to mark entrances, hazards, or points of importance. This symbol would later become the hardest detail to dismiss. If it were only an ornament, the mark could appear anywhere. But it sits on the edge of the shape like a warning or a navigation point, not in the center of beauty, but at the border of danger. For a map, that makes sense. For decoration, it makes much less sense. The Sumerians knew how to measure land. They recorded fields, grain, labor, canals, trade routes, ports, and distances. But this scheme does not look like a map of an ordinary plot near a city. There is no clear field grid, no temple account, no list of taxes. The contour is too large, too marine. It does not show a courtyard, a town, or even a river. It shows a mass of land beyond the familiar world, as if someone was trying to preserve the memory of a place that could no longer be reached on foot. And here comes the first real hook. Ancient people may have known more than what stood directly beside them. Trade carried stories farther than caravans. Sailors returned with images of places that scribes later turned into signs. One early researcher, whose name appears in correspondence only as initials, noted that the fragment did not resemble a religious text. It contained few prayer formulas and almost no divine names. Instead, it included directions, repeated markers, and words that can be read as edge, water, lower land, and return. This does not prove that the object is a map, but it creates an uncomfortable possibility. The tablet may have been a copy of an older navigational memory, rewritten long after the original meaning had begun to fade. The researcher did not claim to have found a sensation. His notes feel cautious, almost embarrassed by their own suggestion. It is as if he was trying to prove that it was not a map, and yet kept returning to the same lines. The strangest turn came in the 1970s. An oceanographer working with bathymetric charts noticed a shape on the sea floor, a raised plateau crossed by channels with a curved edge that resembled an ancient coast. He did not mention it in an official paper, but in a private letter he compared the contour to a Mesopotamian fragment of uncertain purpose. The letter survives in copy, without the attachment. According to the description, what disturbed him most was not the contour itself. It was 3 points near the edge of the plateau, almost where the tablet placed the crescent symbol. Bathymetry does not show cities. It shows the shape of the bottom. But sometimes a shape is enough to make an old document stop looking accidental, especially when the document is older than the technology that could reveal that bottom with such precision. Of course, there is a simple explanation. The photograph may be poor, the lines may be cracks. A collector may have bought a fake and quietly hidden it to protect his reputation. Translators may be seeing a map where an ancient scribe merely damaged the clay. In stories like this, skepticism is not an obstacle. It is required. Without it, every scratch becomes Atlantis, and every stone becomes proof of a lost empire. But here the strange details do not disappear one by one. They begin to assemble. That is why this story cannot promise cheap certainty. It is stronger to show every attempt to destroy the hypothesis and then leave one detail that still refuses to vanish. Decades later, a second fragment surfaced, smaller, rougher, without a map. It allegedly contained a phrase that translators rendered in several ways: the land beneath the salt roof, the low country under the sea covering, or the place where the sun comes from below. It sounds poetic, but in Sumerian texts, water is rarely just water. It is a boundary, a road, a danger, and a memory. If the phrase refers to the same place as the map, then this may not be myth. It may be a memory of land that people continued to describe after it became unreachable. The phrase about land beneath a salt roof may be a metaphor, but ancient metaphors often grow from real disasters. A people does not invent the image of a drowned world from nothing if no one has ever watched the sea take land away. It is important not to turn this place into a childish Atlantis. We do not need golden towers, crystals, and priests throwing lightning. The more plausible image is more disturbing. Imagine a low coastal plain, muddy ports, wooden piers, stone markers along the shore, canals linking lagoons, small settlements living from trade, salt, fish, and crossings. Then the water rises slowly, generation after generation. People move houses, then warehouses, then shrines. And when there is nowhere left to move, someone draws a map of what remains. This version does not require aliens or magic. It only requires time, water, and human memory. And that is more frightening, because this kind of thing really happened. Coasts vanished, people left, stories remained. Geology does not forbid such a version. After the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose and buried huge areas of ancient coastline. We know of drowned plains, old river channels, and settlements now searched for beneath the water. The problem is not whether land could have disappeared under the sea. It could. The problem is whether memory of such land could survive long enough to reach a Sumerian scribe as a map. And if it did, who preserved that memory? Sailors, priests, refugee families, or people who believed themselves to be descendants of those who came from the lost coast? When the sea rises slowly, catastrophe does not look like the end of the world. It looks like one bad year, then another, then the decision to move a storehouse higher. After enough generations, the old shoreline becomes a legend. That is why the Sumerian version is more troubling than an ordinary legend. It does not say that a magical continent existed. It whispers something else. Part of what we call the beginning of civilization may have been a continuation. Not the first act, but the second. Not the sudden invention of the city, but an attempt by survivors to rebuild what the water had already taken. The tablet becomes not a treasure map, but trauma recorded in clay, a small fragment of memory about a place that disappeared too slowly for people to forget at once. That approach makes the story closer to documentary horror. Not a monster from the deep, but the idea that beneath the water may lie cities we do not even know to ask about, because dry land archives survived better than coastal ones. In 1998, a private research group entered the region of the anomalous underwater plateau. The official goal sounded boring: a search for ceramics from a late-period merchant shipwreck. But in a field journal later quoted without the full text, the area is marked differently, Sector of the Three Marks. That name is too close to the symbol on the tablet. The team did not announce that it was looking for a Sumerian continent. No one wanted to sound insane, but the dive routes were built not around the shipwreck but along a line that resembled an ancient shore. In fieldwork, the official goal is often different from the real one. Nobody writes searching for a lost civilization on a permit. They write ceramics, survey, geological assessment. Paper loves boring words. On the third dive, the camera recorded a straight stone edge, not a wall in the dramatic sense, not a temple, not a gate, just a long, nearly straight face emerging from the sediment. Geologists will say that nature can make straight lines, and that is true. But beside the edge were holes set at suspicious intervals, as if wooden supports once fitted into them. In the footage, a diver runs a hand along the stone, silt rises, and for 1 second it becomes clear that the edge continues into darkness beyond the reach of the light. Cameras in places like this never give a perfect image. Only murky water, a shaking lamp, and a few seconds in which the brain tries to decide whether it is looking at a rock or the edge of something made by hands. Then came the find that made the story dangerous for everyone involved. One diver brought up a small fragment of dark stone or fired clay. On it was the sign, a crescent and 3 short vertical marks. Such a symbol would be easy to fake if someone knew the photograph of the tablet. But in the expedition journal, it appears before the team officially received a copy of the archival image. At least, that is what a person who saw the documents later claimed. After that, the season ended early. The equipment was removed, the samples were handed to the sponsor, and the team never returned. The sign on the fragment is the perfect clue and the perfect problem at the same time. Too strong to ignore, too convenient to trust immediately. Details like that are what hold a viewer until the end. The university side later stated that the find had no archaeological context. That is a convenient phrase. It may mean honest scientific caution. The object was not recovered from a controlled excavation. The layer was not documented. Dating is impossible. But it may also mean something else. The object was too inconvenient to become the center of a public debate. The sponsor took the boxes. The full report never appeared in the open database. What remains are low-quality images, a few letters, and an irritating emptiness where answers should be. Scientific caution matters. But in closed stories, caution can become a way to discuss nothing. If there is no context, there is no conclusion. If there is no conclusion, there is no news. If there is no news, the box returns to the dark. There is one more detail on the tablet that is rarely discussed. Near one of the marks is a line that can be translated as a warning. Do not open the lower gates when the water sleeps. It sounds mystical, almost like a curse, but ancient warnings were often practical. Do not enter the tunnel at low tide. Do not touch the sluice when the current changes. Do not pass beneath the shore arch when the sea looks calm. What later appears as ritual fear may have been an engineer's instruction written in the language of its time. This moment should not sound like a curse from a cheap movie. It should sound like an old instruction whose original technology has been forgotten. The people forgot the system, but kept the fear of doing the wrong thing. If the lower gates were part of a port system, the story becomes not less incredible, but more. Then we are not speaking about a random group of fishermen on a shore. We are speaking about people who understood tides, built passages, reinforced stone, marked dangerous zones, and passed maps to those who came later. Not necessarily a super civilization, not necessarily a hidden empire, but a society developed enough to leave a trace that thousands of years later looks like a mistake in the textbook. The more practical the explanation becomes, the deeper the problem grows. Practical engineering leaves the trace of a society, training, materials, masters, rules, memory. It is no longer one lonely fisherman scratching strange lines into clay. This is why such stories meet resistance. History likes clean beginnings, first hunters, then farmers, then villages, then cities. But the sea does not respect our chapters. It erases coastlines where people may have lived, traded, built, and failed long before the places that survived on land. If the earliest experiments in civilization happened near water, Then many first pages of the book simply dissolved and sank. We may be reading history from the middle and mistaking it for the beginning. We are bad at seeing the ancient world that lived on the shore. Stone in a desert looks eternal. Wood, piers, and coastal settlements disappear. Civilization may have begun in the places where evidence preserves worst. The last clue did not come from a museum. It came from cold data. Satellite bathymetry showed a chain of lines on the sea floor that, from a certain angle, nearly matched the main contour on the tablet. Not perfectly, not enough to shout that it is proven, but enough to make the question uncomfortable, especially because 3 raised points near the edge of the plateau sit almost like the 3 marks on the ancient fragment. A coincidence? Possibly. But a coincidence that seems to know exactly where to look. For a video, this is a powerful visual moment. The ancient contour slowly overlays the cold digital relief of the ocean floor, and the viewer notices the resemblance before the narrator says it aloud. The skeptic has to return here. The sea floor is full of shapes that look artificial. Fault lines look like roads. Basalt formations look like walls. Shadows in poor images become cities if someone wants them badly enough. The human brain is built to search for patterns. It sees faces in clouds and maps in cracks. So an honest conclusion cannot sound like a final verdict. There is no recovered city, no dated wall, no public report verified by independent teams. For now, there is only a chain of strange coincidences. It is important not to let the story slide into madness. The skeptic should sound honest, even convincing. That makes the final question stronger because the viewer understands that they are not being tricked. They are being led along the edge of what might be possible. But the central question remains. Why did an ancient scribe draw this particular contour? Why place that symbol beside it? Why does another fragment speak of land beneath a salt roof? Why did an oceanographer with no interest in sensational claims notice a similar shape on the bottom? Each link can be explained separately. But together, they form not proof, but a door. And behind that door is a possibility that historians do not like to say too loudly. If all the pieces can be explained one by one, that does not mean they have been explained together. Sometimes a mystery begins exactly where every coincidence looks acceptable by itself, but their sum becomes too heavy. Maybe the forbidden Sumerian map does not show a continent in the way we imagine one. Not a giant land filled with palaces. Perhaps it shows the last safe route to a dying coast. A chain of islands, ports, and low plains slowly swallowed by water. To the people of that time, that was a continent. A whole world lost not in a single day, but across the lives of several generations. And if the tablet was copied from an older source, then the Sumerians may have preserved not a myth, but a root of survival. That ending is stronger than saying, "We found Atlantis." It is older, colder, and more disturbing. Not a legendary continent, but a lost coastal system whose memory may have become myth before history even learned how to write itself. Then the final question becomes darker. What if the first cities of Mesopotamia were not the beginning of civilization, but its refuge? What if some knowledge of canals, measurement, trade, and stars came from people who had lost their coast? The tablet does not prove it. But it forces us to look at the ocean differently. Maybe beneath the water lies not one secret, but an entire archive of early history. And while we argue over whether the map was real, the sea keeps doing what it has always done. Holding answers where human beings have the hardest time reaching them. The last line should leave the viewer wanting to argue, not to believe blindly, but to choose a side. Was it coincidence, a forgery, a forgotten map, or the trace of a civilization the sea erased first? And if this case feels too convenient to believe, that is exactly why it belongs in the hidden archive. Not because it gives us a clean answer, but because it leaves a question that refuses to stay buried. Was the Sumerian map a fake, a coincidence, a forgotten route, or the last memory of a coastline the sea erased before history began? Leave your theory below. And if you want more buried files, forbidden maps, and discoveries that do not fit where they are supposed to fit, subscribe to Hidden Archive. The next case is already waiting in the dark.